Hello, teacher friends. Welcome back to the UX Teacher Prep Podcast. This is Coach Z, and for today's episode, I had the pleasure of interviewing Joe Natoli. He's a UX consultant, an author, and speaker, and a household name in UX and product design. He's been in the industry for over 3 decades. In this interview, we talked about navigating the corporate workspace, coping with imposter syndrome, the importance of a support system, and so much more. He also talked about the inspiration for his new book, the second edition of the best-selling The User Experience Team of One with Leah Buley. I had so much fun and learned a ton from Joe. I hope you do too. Let's listen in.
Welcome to the UX Teacher Prep Podcast, the ultimate destination for educators who aspire to break into the field of user experience and product design. Your host, Z Arnold, a 15-year teacher turned UX researcher, is here to guide, coach, and mentor you through every twist and turn as you make your career transition into tech. If you're ready for a more satisfying career and lifestyle, and you want the balance to unleash your creativity, this podcast is for you. Now for the show.
Hi, Joe. It's so great to have you on the show today. How are you?
I'm very, very good. How are you?
I'm doing great. So this episode is very unique because you are a UX leader and you have lots of insight into the UX space. So let's start by just telling everyone a bit about who you are.
Well, I started my career as a graphic designer way, way back in the 80s. And that changed with this sort of this little thing called the internet. I was working at an ad agency at the time, and the guys that ran it, the older guys that ran it, were convinced that the internet and the web was a trend. It was a fad, and it was not going to last. And I couldn't convince them that that wasn't the case and that businesses were going to care about it. And I was frustrated enough and young enough and naive enough to say, well, okay, fine. I'm going to go start my own thing and I'm going to design for the web. And right around the same time, interestingly enough, I started teaching as well, part-time at university, which I've done for all that time. And that's like 32 years, something like that. So I started my own firm, grew it to 6 people. We were right in the middle of the explosion of the internet, designing software as a service, websites, et cetera, et cetera. Sold it to an IT company around 2004. Just remembered why I didn't want to work for other organizations. I hung around there for a couple of years and went back to independent consulting. And my wife told me about this little thing called Udemy, where you could teach and you could post courses. And I had about, 8 million client presentations. So she said, why don't you take one of those, put it out there and see what happens? Long story short, you put this thing out into the world and pretty soon it's 500 students. Then it's 1,000. And then it grew exponentially beyond my wildest dreams or expectations. Fast forward to 2024, between Udemy and my own UX 365 Academy, we have over 350,000 students.
Wow.
Which is shocking to say out loud. Okay. I want you to understand that number shocks me every time I say it.
It's a lot.
So that's kind of been my journey. I still consult with clients. I do a lot of speaking gigs at conferences. Written about 10 books. A bunch that are self-published. Most recent one for Rosenfeld Media is called User Experience Team of One with the brilliant Leah Buley. And I live a very fortunate life, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah.
But teaching is actually at the core of everything I do, even in consulting.
Yeah. So when you were teaching at the university, were you teaching like UX courses?
Yes.
Okay. Awesome.
Strategic design thinking. And that was even way back in the 90s. Good design is about what you do with what's between your ears.
Right.
So yeah, all aspects of it. I mean, from freshmen to juniors to seniors to graduate students, I've been doing that all the way up until 2 semesters ago.
Wow. That's awesome. So when I first came into the UX space after teaching in a classroom in New York City, one of the things that I noticed a lot is that folks would say things like, and this was like 2022, like, you have to be a unicorn. And I was listening to what you just said, and I was wondering, would you consider yourself, first of all, what is a UX unicorn, and would you consider yourself one?
Well, it's not a term I would use.
Okay.
Because I think the perception of that when companies say it, all right, when employers and hiring folks say it, what they want is they want someone to do the job of 3 people.
Oh, got it.
Very different definition. But to your point, I think I am in a lot of ways. And I think I'm a generalist. I always have been.
Mm-hmm.
I have always felt from the very beginning that I should be good at a lot of things in a lot of areas, of design. And that's partly just because that's the way I'm built. I'm very, very super interested in a lot of things. I get very excited about a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you offer me something I haven't done yet, my immediate instinct is to say yes, whether I have time for it or not.
Yeah.
That's part of it. The other part of it is I always felt like the way to be more useful and more valuable and the way to progress and the way to have more opportunities open to me was to be really good at a lot of things. So that when a client, in particular, when I started working for myself, so when a client said, have you ever done A, B, or C? I had two answers. The first answer would be, yeah, as a matter of fact, we just did that for somebody last month and here's how it went. And the other answer is you sort of fake your way through it and say, yeah, with the mind of, I don't really know how to do that, but I'm going to figure it out.
Mm-hmm. Okay, got it.
Because opportunity, presents itself only so often. You have to be able to say yes to those things. I also think that in your career, at the beginning of what we now call, UX, I think it was important to be a generalist because the role was largely undefined, right? And nobody really knew what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got into specialization over the years. And now I honestly think we're at a strange inflection point where that generalism is coming back to this profession.
Interesting.
Where you're starting to see specialized roles kind of go away.
Yeah,
I think your point is very timely.
Oh, yeah. Let's talk about that because I remember when I was studying UX, I kind of did stuff on my own and I was researching things online and taking little courses here and there. And I did take some like certification courses. But one thing that I noticed was that when it came down to like UX research, I really couldn't find a course that was specifically geared towards, that particular part of UX. And I feel like a lot of courses just kind of touch the surface about just UX in general. So talk to me about what you've done. And I know you have that course at Academy UX 365. So talk to me about what you've done there and how you've kind of like taught UX research or maybe not taught UX research and UX writing and all the different kind of like smaller parts.
It's a lot of everything. Okay. If you take a look at the curriculum there, it's not structured like a boot camp where you start here and then you go through the entire progression, and then you come out with a certificate. There are courses that have certificates, but it's all the topics you could possibly think of doing UX work. There's certainly fundamental principles and approaches and methods. It touches UX research. It touches content strategy and writing. It touches information architecture. It touches actual design. It also touches career issues, landing and finding a job, negotiating salary, portfolio. But the bulk of what is there and where our focus really is how this work happens day to day.
Right.
When you get a job inside a company, the one thing that nobody tells you is that the way the work is going to be done is radically different than anything you've ever been taught in a boot camp or university classroom or read in a book or a YouTube video or all the stuff you read about on social media. It's different. There are very purposeful constraints and you are not ever going to have the time or the budget or the personnel or the or the whatever to do all these things that you've been led to believe is the quote unquote right way to do the work. Okay. This book that just came out, the UX Team of One, is along the same thread. Okay. So everything I've ever done is along that thread that I just mentioned, which is here's how it really works. Here's the stuff you're going to have to contend with. And here are the things that you should know about what you're walking into so that you don't get the job and go in and then run headfirst into a brick wall. And what happens, right? I mean, the important part about this is that it makes people feel incapable of doing the work. Okay. They have that experience. And then they feel like, well, I read all this stuff online, about how UX is supposed to work and I'm supposed to be able to interview users and they blame themselves.
Right.
And they feel like there's something wrong with me. It must be me, right? Because I can't get anything done here. And it's not true. It's really absolutely not true.
And what you said about the brick wall, it kind of reminded me of teaching because, you read the books, you read all the things that you learned in class. And then when you get into the classroom, it's like, somebody's throwing a chair across the room and it's like, wait, that wasn't in chapter 3 or 4. That wasn't in the book at all. Like, I didn't expect that, So it sounds very similar. So, and I was looking at your information online about the course, and it said that you help people kind of navigate what you call the messy corporate world. Can you talk more about that? Can you talk more about that phrase?
Sure. I mean, here's the simplest way to say it. Corporations, companies, organizations, from startups to mid-sized organizations to large enterprise organizations. From an organizational structure standpoint, they are set up, designed on purpose for diametric opposition between departments, between people in different roles, between people in different job functions, because everybody's responsible for a different piece. All right. So what they need and the metrics that they need and the outcomes that they need are very different from yours.
Right.
You know, product argues with marketing, argues with sales, argues with finance, for example. You know, there's a lot of pushback between product managers and their bosses, and then product managers and designers and UXers, and then UXers and developers or the IT department. And it's because all these people, us included, are on the hook for very different results, very different outcomes.
Right.
You have to walk in understanding that. When you're told no, it almost has nothing to do with you.
Right.
When you say I need 2 weeks of research and the PM says, you can't have it. We can't do that. That answer has nothing to do with you. It, by and large, it doesn't reflect the fact that, well, nobody cares about UX and nobody wants to do the right thing for customers and blah, blah, blah. They have a bigger need that has to get met. They have to launch something, anything, to check a box in 2 weeks because there's a promise that's been made several levels above you that you don't even know about.
Right.
That has to get executed on, come hell or high water, or someone loses their job, or let's get real, someone doesn't get their quarterly performance bonus, or the stock price suffers, or there's all sorts of things that go on inside a company that have nothing to do with UX. And I think that it's easy to believe that we're sort of the center of the universe. We're not.
Right. And so here I am in my little, UX research box, and I'm saying, why can't we fix that one thing? All the users said, this didn't work for them. And yet we're still doing that. And then there's like people above me and above them and things that have to be done that you're right, I know nothing about. And I'm just seeing so many similarities between this and the teaching space, honestly, because, you have your principal and they have to answer to the superintendent and you don't know what's going on in their conversations, when they have their doors closed. But then you as a teacher, you're like, look, these are my students. I know what's best for them and I know what to do. But then you have other people telling you that, no, we're going to go this way in this direction. And you do end up feeling like, it's something against you personally. So it's hard to kind of navigate that space. And you talked about like, there's more to the whole UX course that you teach than just the actual, the training for the skills. But let's talk a little bit about the imposter syndrome, because, teachers who I speak to and who listen to my podcast, they're transitioning out of the classroom. And of course they have imposter syndrome and they're like, okay, just like you said, I learned all the skills and now like, how do I present myself? Oh, I can't do this. This is not for me. Or, they start the work and first week, it's like, okay, what am I doing here? How do you kind of teach people to navigate that imposter syndrome issue?
Yeah, well, there's multiple parts of that, quite honestly. And whenever I say this, people are very surprised. I've struggled with that my entire life, my entire career, ever since I was young. There are probably multiple reasons why. It kind of doesn't matter. Okay, it's there. I don't think you get any traction over imposter syndrome, whatever the scale of that is, however bad you have it. I don't think you get any traction over it until you accept one important fact. And that is, it's not going away.
Right.
You're not going to wake up one day and suddenly never doubt yourself again. Okay?
Sadly.
It is not going to happen.
Sadly. I wish it would happen, but yeah, you're right. It's at some point. So it's always going to be there. Yeah.
So instead, you accept the fact that, look, this is part of who I am. And then you take steps to manage it, to deal with it, to overcome it. Okay. To say, look, Mr. or Mrs. Imposter, you get to sit in the passenger seat of the car. That's okay. Right? You're allowed to ride with me, but you are not allowed to put your hands on the wheel. Right? I'm driving this bus.
I love that. Wait, I should write that down. That's good. Okay.
So that's what it is. It's moments of checking yourself and saying, okay, I know what this is. I know what this voice is. I know where it comes from. Just, I understand. I accept what you're saying, but it's not real. I have to go forward anyway. And so the way that you combat this is practice. All right. You combat it by practice. You combat it by looking at your life and say, look, nothing has stopped me up to now. All right. I'm still here. I'm still doing this job. I just got another job. I got a teaching job. I got a UX job, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
If you get a new job, it's because you were good enough to get the job, period.
Yeah.
End of story. You have to walk in and do the work believing that. And the other thing that you have to do, and there's not enough room in a podcast, okay, to walk through like a lot of what I coach people to do, but you have to stop taking other people's opinions and judgments as truth. You have to judge what you do and what the outcome is on its own merit. You are going to encounter people who are going to belittle what you do. They're going to disagree with what you do. They're going to say, well, that just doesn't make any sense to me. They're going to set policies that don't make any sense to you, that you feel very personal about, as if, someone's trying to tie your hands behind your back.
Mm-hmm.
You have to let that go. It has nothing to do with you. Other people's stuff, no matter what the reason for it is, it's other people's stuff.
Right.
Judge the work on its own merit. Judge the results on your own merit. If you teach, if you train like I do,
Mm-hmm.
the only metric that I care about is whether or not I have students and clients and product teams, right, that come back to me and say, you don't know how helpful this has been. We've done A, B, C, D, and E, and here's what it's gotten us.
Mm-hmm.
Can't thank you enough. That's my metric.
Yep. The results.
People say to me all the time, but what do you do when a client won't take your advice? In a way, I don't care. All right. I care about them very much. I care about the outcome. I'm trying to help them, of course. But I can't take their decisions personally. It's not up to me.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
You know what I mean? I don't have the power to change that.
Mm-hmm.
It affects their life a hell of a lot more than it affects mine as a consultant.
Mm-hmm.
So my job is to be honest. My job is to do everything I possibly can to help them. But you can't hang yourself on a hook for someone else's decision making.
That's true.
And I think that's what we do. I think a lot of us do that.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. That's some good advice right there. So along your journey, I know you've been in this space for basically, it sounds like 3 decades. So along your journey, did you have any mentors who inspired you to like keep going? Maybe in a time when you felt like you weren't going to keep going. Do you have anybody who you looked up to?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of them. There are a lot of them. And I always feel bad about this because I know I'm leaving people out. David Flynn, who's a lifelong friend, was a creative director at the first agency that I ever worked at. Mm-hmm. Incredibly kind human being, exposed me to all sorts of parts of working with clients. And I was a kid, I was an intern. And instead of relegating me to like cleaning the coffee maker, he let me work on real projects, and that was massive. And he taught me along the way. I'm forever grateful for that. In the user experience space, there have been lots of people who I feel like are responsible for my career. When I came across the work of Alan and Sue Cooper, for example, blown away. I'm like, this guy, and the way that the two of them as a couple, the way they were doing their business, the way they were running Cooper was the blueprint for my own firm. Okay. Even earlier than that, I didn't come across UX through Don Norman like a lot of people did. I came through it through Jesse James Garrett and his book, The Elements of User Experience. To me, that was like, my head exploded when I read that book. That was the beginning of my transition from traditional design to UX, because everything that Jesse said in that book it just made total sense to me. It was in line with everything I had been taught about how to design appropriately for people. Mm-hmm. I cannot overestimate the importance of that book in my career trajectory. Okay. It absolutely guided everything that I did. And to come full circle now and have Jesse write the foreword for this book, he wrote the foreword.
Oh, wow.
For the
That's
user
amazing.
experience team of one. You have no idea.
That is amazing.
What a moment that was, and he and I've conversed back and forth over the last couple of years, which in and of itself is a gift.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
But talk about just an incredible human being. Alan Cooper, same thing. Alan and I have gotten to know each other over the years. I mean, it's not like we're best of friends, but we have become friends. We talk often. He and his wife were kind enough to help me write a foreword for another book that I'm working on. Just pure inspiration, okay? Kindness, generosity. These folks were always willing to take the time to step in and answer questions. You know, and there are lots of people. A friend of mine by the name of Brian McIntyre helped me get my first business off the ground, you know, was absolute support and believed in me and gave me tremendous guidance business-wise that I wouldn't otherwise have had. Mm-hmm. You know, the folks who worked for me early on in my career. Mm-hmm. There's just a long list of people who've continued to inspire me. And there are people that do that now.
Right.
You know, it's one of the great strokes of luck in my life that because of what I do, I come across a lot of people from students to colleagues, you know, people that I speak at conferences with, all these other authors that are at Rosenfeld Media. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I came up looking up to these people and now I talk to them every week. Right. It's I cannot overestimate the importance of that, whatever you want to call it, right? Support system, family, inspiration, guidance, something to sort of check yourself against. It's immeasurable.
That sounds really amazing, just to have all those people in your path to guide you as you went and just to keep you motivated to do the work that you're doing.
If you ever told me 30 years ago, if you told me I was going to be mentioned in the same sentence with some of these people, I would have laughed you out of the room. Okay, there's no way. Yeah. There's no way. So this doesn't even make sense to me some days.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. Like, you know, everything coming full circle with the book. And also speaking of the book, yeah, so UX team of one. And I noticed that it said second edition. So there was a first edition.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about, you know, without giving away the entire book, just tell me a little bit more about the book.
Sure. Here's and massive credit for all this goes to the author of the first edition, Leah Buley. You know, who's I co-authored this book with. This is one of those situations, okay? Like all the people I just talked about, I read this book when it came out over a decade ago, and I was in love with it instantly, okay? It's one of 3 books that I read, and I felt like after I read it, I'm like, man, I wish I'd written this. You know, seriously. Jesse's book was the first, Leah's book was the second, and then Steve Krug's Don't Make Me Think. But they're all,
good one.
They're simple. Right. And Steve is the same way. I mean, what a guy.
Yep.
But they're all practical and actionable and simple. What Leah did, and people tell this story, okay, when she was at Adaptive Path, this book was born apparently out of a presentation that she gave while she was at Adaptive Path. And everyone who was in the room, people still talk about this online now that the second edition is out, was blown away. This makes so much sense. And she did what I think this book still does, which is bring all this down to earth. It's accessible. It's approachable. No matter who you are, no matter what challenges you're facing, whether you're a team of one or a team of a few, this book is kind of like everything you could ever possibly want to know about UX practice and methods and the world in which you will be working in one place. It's an astounding feat. So when Lou Rosenfeld reached out, I think it was like a year and a half ago now, and said, would you be interested in doing, you know, the second edition of, and he started to say the title. And I was like, yes, absolutely. And he's like, do you want to hear the rest? I said, no.
Wow. What an opportunity.
Yeah. You know, same thing. Like I told you, when I read the book the first time, I was like, this is just, it's phenomenal.
Right.
As someone who's an author, like I said, there are lots of books I've written where you finish them and you go, man, I wish I wrote that, because it's in line with everything that I believe.
Right.
So to be involved in a second edition, and really what we've done is we've brought it into the present. You know, time dates everything. The core of the book, the methods, the approach, the process, the principles that she first talked about, you know, a decade ago are still absolutely 100% true. All we really did is we included a lot of the challenges that have come about as a result of the way business has changed, quite frankly, over the years. And with the advance of technology and then the speed at which that's happening, there's been a lot of rapid change, you know, in a 10-year period or whatever it is. So I couldn't be more honored to be part of this. And I also honestly think, without sounding like I'm biased, which I probably am, I think for new practitioners especially, or practitioners who are struggling, I think this is the absolute best book you can pick up. I really, really believe that. And that is more on Leah than it is on me.
Wow. Sounds amazing. It sounds really good. I remember when I first started in UX, I was like trying to get the best books out there. I was asking people like, what's the best UX book I can read? What are the books? And I did get Don't Make Me Think. And that was one of the first ones that I read as well. So yeah. So before I let you go, I just want to ask you, for my audience who are basically teachers who are transitioning into UX or interested in the UX field, what advice would you give them as they're trying to transition into the field?
Well, a couple things. I mean, number one, because you're transitioning from one career to another, one of the things that you absolutely have to do in your resume, in your LinkedIn profile, in a portfolio, is you cannot completely discount your past experience as a teacher. Okay. You want to look back at all the things that you've done as an educator, and you want to tell those stories from the lens of user experience. In this case, it's probably student experience. Okay. Learning outcomes. There is a whole lot, to me, there's a whole lot of crossover between teaching and UX. But you can't necessarily just tell stories about being a teacher. Go back through your history, look at what you've done, and say to yourself, okay, which of these stories, which of these things that I have accomplished, what outcomes do I have that I can reframe through a UX point of view perspective? That's important, because what you don't have, the one disadvantage you are operating at, is that you don't have real client work yet.
Right. And
that's a problem. We're at a point where most recruiters are going to give you 30 seconds. That's not a lie. Okay. That's a fact.
Yeah.
Talk to just about any recruiter. If they'll admit it, they'll tell you that. The ones that I know in the companies that I have, worked with in the past, they'll tell you. They've got a list of stuff. It's 30 seconds. Do I care? Does this matter? What has this person done? So the fact that you don't have actual work, and you have to get some, by the way, that is a
of course,
prerequisite as well. So you've got to be telling really compelling stories from the minute somebody hits that page. It can't just be did this, did this, did this, did this, did this. Who cares? If you've worked for an organization, if you've taught for a university, if you whatever, what did you help them accomplish? How did you make them better? What did you give those students that they couldn't get anywhere else? You have to be telling a compelling story that says, I am uniquely positioned for this role, and here's why.
Yep.
It's a sales pitch.
Yep, exactly.
It's hard. It's a hard time to get hired in this profession right now. The hiring process itself is very broken.
Yeah.
That's putting it kindly. It's broken right now. Everything takes longer than it should. There's bottlenecks because of the 12 rounds of interviews.
Right.
All this process and artifice that's in place because people are risk averse. It's all very silly, and it slows down the entire thing. And you just have to be, my 3 things I tell people all the time, it's the 3 Ps: patience, persistence, perseverance. Not going to be fast.
Yeah.
It's not going to be fast. It's going to take longer than you want.
Yeah.
It's going to hurt. You're going to be demoralized at multiple points along the journey. You got to stick with it.
Yeah, stick with it. I like that. I like that advice. I mean, I think when I came into UX in 2022, it was a little bit faster than the norm.
Oh, yeah.
I'm seeing now, after interviewing so many people and just keeping a pulse on what's happening, I'm seeing now that is definitely changing and it's taking longer, just like you said. And so I think it's really important for teachers to be able to look at all the things they've done in the past and kind of try to look at it through a UX lens and see what they can pull out and say, okay, I've done this for users, my students, just like you said. Yeah. So don't start from a place of deficit, but talk about what you've already done and how that relates to the UX space.
Yes. Powerful. I mean, think about it. Okay. Teachers, I don't know a single teacher. I've never met a single teacher at either high school level, middle school level, or college level who hasn't essentially been working to educate a class with one arm tied behind their back. You never have the resources you need.
Right.
You just certainly don't have the time you need. Okay. Anybody that has ever taught knows that it is not restricted to the hours you spend in a classroom. All right. It's 3 times that. So I feel like there are lots of stories where you had to overcome constraints, limitations. You had to innovate. You had to say, okay, well, how do I get this done?
Right.
I think those stories are there. I really do.
Yeah, I agree. They are definitely there. So it was so great to have you on the show today, Joe. Thank you for all the advice you gave and telling your story here.
Sure.
So if anyone wants to reach out to you, get their hands on your book, connect with you, work with you, how can they do that?
2 places. My public website is givegoodux.com.
I love this.
And you'll find links to just about,
Give good UX. I just love that. Okay.
I saw a t-shirt once that said, it was an environmental kind of thing. It said, give good earth.
Oh.
And that always struck with them. Like, that's cool.
Yeah, that's cool.
I saw something years ago that said, give good interface. And it's funny. Like, and I came up with that many years ago, but I've always kind of liked it. It just makes me chuckle.
Yeah.
And the UX 365 Academy is at www.ux365academy, ux365academy.com.
Mm-hmm.
You can also go to Rosenfeld Media to find the new book, but everything is everywhere, and I do a lot of social media, probably too much. I probably spend too much time on social media. I have a YouTube channel where I try to post lots of just quick instructional videos or ideas and concepts and principles and methods that I think will help people. I have lots of free books on my website as well.
Awesome.
That people can grab. Just trying to give back, as much as possible. One of the things that you hit upon, when you ask me about people who have helped me throughout my career, I take all that very seriously. And as much as I can, I try to make sure that I'm always putting something out there in return.
Right.
Even when I have to promote my own stuff, I try to make it so that I'm giving 3 or 4 or 5 things before I ever ask for anything. I just feel like that's the right way to do it.
Yeah, that sounds right. And that feels right. I mean, just the fact that you just mentioned that you have a lot of free books that people can access, that's amazing too. So I'm going to drop all of those links to the things that you mentioned in the description box, in the show notes.
Cool.
So that people can access them. And Joe, I just want to thank you again for coming in today. It was so great to hear from you.
Thank you. Thank you, Z. I really appreciate the time. And this has been wonderful. I could probably do it all day.
Yeah, I know. All right. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning in. If you like this podcast, hit follow and scroll down to leave a 5-star rating. Then share it with a friend. If you're looking for resources to help you on your tech transition journey, head over to uxteacherprep.com. Follow us on LinkedIn and Instagram at uxteacherprep for daily tips and motivation. Have a topic you'd like to hear addressed on the show? Send us a DM on Instagram. If you're listening on YouTube, like, subscribe, and share. Until next time, be well.